Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Root Causes of Mental Health, where we explore the hidden root causes of mental health problems and how to treat them. I'm your host, Dr. Bruce Kehr, the founder of Potomac Psychiatry, and today I have the honor of being able to bring you a true pioneer in the evidence-based treatment of children with autism. He's also an accomplished author. It was great pleasure that I introduced my colleague and friend, Dr. Jeffrey Kranzler. Dr. Kranzler is a graduate of the Johns Hopkins University and holds a master's and a PhD from the Weiler School of Social Work. He specializes in working with autism individuals across the lifespan and teaches social skills, mood regulation, anxiety management, executive functioning, interoception, and confidence building skills. He's also very successful at recruiting and other very talented therapists to work with him in his practice. He served as social work supervisor at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, a dean of students at a large school in South Florida, and has been performing therapy in a variety of settings for more than 16 years. He's also the author of a really cool book called The Crimson Protector, about a superhero that teaches tweens and teens how to build confidence, overcome social anxiety, and handle bullying, which is available in print and ebook versions on Amazon and at thecrimsonprotector.com. Welcome, Dr. Kranzler, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's very kind of you.
Well, let's begin with some of the questions that our visitors and followers have been asking me in advance of knowing that I'm going to be interviewing you. Let's begin with, what are some of your core beliefs about autism?
Autism is not an illness in any way whatsoever. And not only can you not cure autism, if you possibly could, you would not want to. Autism going away means planes fall out of the sky. Our entire medical system, legal system, engineering, technological, and basically every other field falls apart. Autism is the reason why we have the best professionals at every field. So what autism is a neurological difference. And individuals with autism can struggle. And I like to not use the word with autism. I actually like to use the word autistic individuals. But every single person has the right to describe themselves how they want to be described. But I use, and I think a lot of people these days are now switching to the term autistic individuals. But autistic individuals are some of the most successful in their fields. There are struggles that the 21st century provides, and there are also incredible strengths. And when there is a struggle for autistic individuals, the key, what I believe is what they struggle with is not an inherent deficit, but rather is a difficulty with the time that we live in. People have a lot more attention to autism these days, and it's not because it is more widespread or the rates have gone up, but rather that the society and the way the world is now actually provides a whole lot more roadblocks than they did many years ago.
Can you say some more for our listeners and our viewers? What's changed? What are some of the roadblocks that exist today that, let's say, didn't exist in the past?
So some of the things that autistic individuals struggle with is change, our sensory pieces, our increased needs for social skills. And the truth is that 150 years ago, there was very little change in a person's life. As the joke goes, somebody was born and died in the same suit. You were not constantly having to wear many new clothing with all different kinds of feels. The diet that you had was pretty much the same from day to day. Your job did not change constantly. And you did not have to go through 24 years of study of many subjects that had, number one, no interest to you, and number two, no relevance or use to you. Again, the change was not as intense and constant. The sensory pieces, again, you're wearing the same clothes, you're eating the same food. There is no dinging. There is no constant sirens going off. And then from terms of social skills, you were born in a community and you lived in that community until you died. And so there wasn't a need to unendingly meet new people and talk about things that were interesting to them. You knew everybody. You knew what to say. You knew what not to say. Things were very, very clear. And these struggles that are present for autistic individuals, I would say, is really a result of the way the world works now rather than inherently being a deficit.
So let me see if I understand. This is fascinating. When I was in training, we were trained by psychoanalysts a great deal, and they used to use this phrase, the average expectable environment. And in those days, which wasn't that long ago, that was still true. We had average expectable environments. Environments were more stable. The pace of change, the rate of change was much slower back then. When we first moved to this area, it was a sleepy southern town. It's a little hard to believe outside of DC and DC nowadays, thinking about it as a sleepy southern town, but that's the way it was. So you're saying that in a way, the environment has changed so much and the rate of change is so much more rapid that presents a lot of challenges.
Absolutely. And it's not just the rate of change, it's the intensity of the sensory pieces and the social reality, which is a complete difference from the way humans interacted with people for tens of thousands of years.
You know, it makes a lot of sense because if we look at the human genome, it doesn't change a whole lot for thousands of years. You know, the genes we have inside of us more or less are pretty much the same as what our ancestors had 50,000 or 250,000 years ago. And yet the environment has changed so dramatically. So in a way, maybe it's partially because we've moved so much from, let's call it a natural environment, living on farms, living in the woods, living in small towns, that this has really impacted, let's say, individuals who are more vulnerable to these kinds of changes. And maybe, you know, even in a broader sense, we could speculate, you know, why are rates of mental illness going up? Maybe for the same reasons that you're describing here.
And what I like to tell people is when you do things that your body is built to do, your body rewards you. So again, when you're being active, your body was built to be active. Your body wasn't built to sit in a chair. You're right. Our bodies have not changed in tens of thousands of years. I tell a lot of people that if you took a time machine and you went back thousands of years, there'd be two things that'd be strange about you: your clothes and your height. But other than that, you would look like everybody else. And so our reality has changed, our bodies have not. And when you do give your body what it has originally been created for, it rewards you. It's one of the reasons why I think people who search for things, people who are seeking, why retail therapy I think is so effective, is because when you're searching for something and then you find it, your body says, you are looking for resources. You are looking for food. I am going to give you the neurotransmitters response to you doing what you were meant to do. So those people who are looking through racks of clothing or looking through these products, one or the other, and then find something, there is that, I think, a deep evolutionary hit, a dopamine hit. And so again, and what that goes to show is that when you are doing things that are not within what your body had trained you to do, sitting in a chair, playing video games, any of those things, you're not going to get the same kind of response.
That's really, really fascinating. Thank you. There's a term that's being used more and more in our field. I think it's making its way into the lay press. Neurodiversity. What is neurodiversity? What does it mean?
So people have different definitions of it, and there's some definitions of neurodiversity that are incredibly large. I happen to not like very, very wide definitions because it takes away from what the word means. But I do believe that a lot of the people who are using neurodiversity means specifically autistic individuals, ADHD, and learning differences. And I do not see them as learning disabilities. I see them as learning differences. And those individuals' minds tend to work somewhat differently than the non-neurodiverse or non-neurodivergent and who we term neurotypical. There are some, again, like I mentioned before, there's some who include trauma and bipolar, and I don't like those expanded definitions because I do think there is some very important similarities between autism, ADHD, and learning differences that are not present in others. But the term neurodiversity also comes to mean that, very much like I was saying in the beginning of when we began speaking, that this is not an illness, it is a difference. Hence, the word diversity really is applicable here.
Well, that begins to raise questions about identity. And this is an area that maybe you could shed some light on. All of us, particularly when we're young, struggle to find our identity. And that's one of the main tasks of, that period from, let's say, late adolescence to age 30, although now it's probably extending into the 30s for lots of young people, to form an identity, a stable identity, and feel good about it. Are you suggesting that there's some aspect of identity that, let's say, parents of children that have autism might think about or try to understand about their child?
Well, I hope so. And I think identity is very, very personal. And if somebody does not want this to be a part of their identity, they never have to have it. Those who are proud of it, I think it is a wonderful part of identity. The ability to know that you are part of a group of individuals who are incredibly good at what they do, who are incredibly creative, who just do what they do better, longer, and harder than anybody else. And I think that a sense of pride in it is a wonderful thing.
I really like the way you think about it. And I think it can help our viewers, even adults who have discovered that they're on the spectrum, that diversity just means difference. It doesn't mean worse.
Yeah.
And I know some of the adults that I'm seeing who have kids on the spectrum, we then begin to think about themselves. Or am I on the spectrum? It often is the case where their approach, which I really support, is they're just trying to understand what it means. How are they different? Not are they better or worse, but just how are they different? And then to integrate that into their understanding of themselves. But let's try to understand also, I'm really very interested in the kind of work that you and your colleagues do. So why do you think, what if I'm the parent of a child on the spectrum, what would make me consider getting treatment for my child? And what might that look like? That kind of treatment. Tell us more about the kind of work that you and your colleagues do.
Like we said before, the world is set up in many ways that provides disadvantages for autistic individuals. So when you're looking for help, it should not be, number one, to change who you or your child is as a person, nor is it to eliminate autism. The point of treatment is to learn the set of skills that you need to navigate a world that was created by and for neurotypical people. Treatment for autism, I say, is very much like going to law school. When you go to law school, you do not change as a human being. Going to law school means you get a very specific set of skills to navigate a very specific system. And that's what we do in my practice and what I hope other people are doing as well. And so those sets of skills, like we had spoken about before, there are struggles based on the new social expectations. So we'll be working on social skills. There are struggles because of the unending sensory issues. Now, a lot of the sensory work goes to an occupational therapist. However, there is mitigation, figuring out how you can lower the exposure to sensory issues, how to mitigate when you have to deal with them. And the other part is dealing with the change, the nonstop, unending change that the world foists upon you, and managing to develop some flexibility skills. Being in a world that is not created for you automatically inserts a sense of anxiety, and being excluded and isolated because you're different leads to senses of sadness. And so dealing with anxiety, anxiety management and mood regulation become a key piece, either because there is an anxiety disorder associated with the individual who's coming in for treatment, or simply because of the anxiety that is quite logical and frankly makes a whole lot of sense to have when you're living in such a world. And so that's, of course, there's additional needs often for executive functioning help. There's needs, multiple different skills needs that are required. And again, if anybody here listening to the podcast is 200 years old and you remember, back 200 years ago, the need for executive functioning was practically non-existent. You got up at 6 o'clock, you milked Bessie, then you plowed the field. And I apologize to all farmers listening to this podcast because I am absolutely destroying what farming actually is. But it was essentially the same schedule every single day. You didn't have Tuesday where you had 5 classes, Wednesday when you had 7, but see, 3 of them were half the time that the Tuesday classes were. Then you got them home, and then Wednesday night you had ballet classes, and on Thursday you had soccer. So you have this really lack of need for executive functioning and a lack of need to consistently do non-preferred activities. And that's one thing we, haven't spoken so much about, but the flip side of being able to engage better in interesting, in topics and subjects that are interesting, it comes on the flip side, a difficulty in engaging in non-interesting or perceived non-important subjects, which, by the way, wasn't an issue until the Industrial Revolution changed how we do academics. Again, 250 years ago, you were a farmer or you were perhaps had a trade. And what did you do? You went to that smith and you spent 3-4 years learning that trade and that trade only. That means you went and you did it yourself. So much of what we experience today is created by the environment, and it's also the reality. And the truth is, you can't go and live a 200-year-old life in the present world. And so the purpose of, quote, treatment, and maybe that's the wrong term, and maybe you have to use that, perhaps you don't, but the term is skills training to navigate the system.
So it's interesting, as you're talking, it reminds me of something a friend of mine said that's analogous. So I have a friend who served in Afghanistan 3 times. And he's a decorated war hero. And he once said to me, what kept me alive in Afghanistan causes my PTSD back home. So what you're saying is that what was adapted in one environment, one reality, presents challenges in a different reality. So for these individuals you're describing, when they have an environment which is more expectable, they do better than an environment with all of this rapid change and chaos. And so, in a way, it sounds like what you and your colleagues do is, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, but maybe, and see if you agree, you might feel free to disagree, that basically what you're trying to teach is ways of adapting more effectively. Is that fair? Is that a fair summary?
I think that's definitely one way of putting it. And I think whichever way, as long as, adaptation doesn't mean changing who you are as a person. And if not, then adapting is right on, because but I think you said perfectly, it's the environment, and what's appropriate in one environment is inappropriate in another. And we teach that as one of the basics in social skills, is figuring out your environment. One of the things we learn is that, there isn't one set of social skills that is true across environments. There are some, right? You want to be kind. There's certain things, you do want to avoid, but if you raise your hand in a classroom before you speak, that's great. If you raise your hand in the playground before you speak, that is a terrible idea. And so much is environment dependent. I heard this somewhere, and I forget where I heard this, but if you take a bottle of water in a grocery store, it'll be $1. In a ballpark, it'll be $5. In the airport, it'll be $7. What's the difference? It's the same bottle of water. The only thing that's changed is the environment. And environment makes a whole lot of difference.
I'm learning a lot from you today. When we look at this population from a neuropsychiatric standpoint and a neuroimmunologic standpoint, I was talking to you before we started today about this research. Dr. Richard Fry has pioneered a lot of this research in these immune system challenges that 70 to 75% of people with autism have, where their immune system makes antibodies to folate receptors in the brain. And what happens is The B cells in their immune system make antibodies that attack and block these folate receptors in the brain that keep folic acid, vitamin B9 from getting into the brain cells to repair DNA and make new DNA and help produce serotonin and norepinephrine and dopamine and glutathione, all these important neurotransmitters to regulate mood and anxiety and focus. And we see about 70 to 75% of kids with autism have these antibodies. It's really an autoimmune condition of the brain, but we're seeing a rise in autoimmunity generally in the population because of a variety of different environmental factors, some of which you're describing, all this stress, right? We're seeing more autoimmunity in part because of these environments that are changing so rapidly and dramatically, right? So one of the things we try to do together with you and your colleagues and our developmental behavioral pediatrician, Dr. Ng, we try and work collaboratively to address the psychosocial, the psychoeducational, the cognitive, along with the neuroimmunologic and the neuropsychiatric, so we can focus on the brain as well as the being, as it were. So when you and your colleagues work with, and you work with people across the lifespan, it's not just children, can you give our viewers an idea and our listeners an idea of what are the sessions like? You know, let's say I were a fly on the wall inside your office. What goes on to really help these individuals?
I think the first and foremost is that every one of my clinicians, and I hope everyone out there working with autistic individuals, are really excited to spend time with autistic individuals. There is an importance of actually really enjoying the time together. And that's one of the reasons I got specifically into this field. And number one, accepting somebody for exactly where they are, checking in and seeing what's on their mind, and then discussing together what set of skills might be the most helpful at that time, or seeing if we can continue a set of skills that we've been looking at prior, right? And if, let's say, a major struggle right now is anxiety. So working on some anxiety skills building. If there's some struggle in the social realm, working on that. If there is some difficulty with mood dysregulation, either working on directly mood dysregulation skills, or what often is at the core of the mood dysregulation that autistic individuals experience is a struggle with the flexibility that is constantly demanded by the world. And so I think sometimes people can miss out on that. And it's very important to understand the underlying flexibility pieces, but it's really important to reach out, if it's a child, to reach out to the parent and see what's going on, to reach out to the actual child. If it's an adult, reaching out to the adult as well, and making sure that you are serving their needs as much as possible.
What about the environment, right? So we've been talking about, and you mentioned earlier, first thing today, that the environment has changed so dramatically from what it was 200 years ago. Is there a role for, and we can't change reality, right? The reality we live with is, more or less the one we're given, right? But are there certain kinds of environmental interventions that may become a part of the plan? The therapeutic plan?
Absolutely. There absolutely is. I highly encourage anybody who's working with autistic individuals to absolutely assess the environment and kind of figure out what is malleable in it. Yes, you can't change the entire world. However, there are many opportunities to optimize an environment for an individual. And that whether that is having some supports in a school setting, changing how things are done inside one's own household, getting the opportunity to change what can be changed is very, very important. And then once we can kind of figure out what that is, then working to mitigate those pieces that can't be changed.
For our viewers and listeners, any fundamental principles around that? Any sort of guiding words of wisdom about generally what to try and accomplish?
So I think you met one into autistic individual, you've met one autistic individual. Everybody is an individual. Everybody is very different. In general, at the same time, what again is not true across the board, but I do think is true very often, is that lowering the sensory overload in an environment can be incredibly helpful. I think lowering the amount of change, so standardizing as much as you can to make things predictable. Again, you can't do it across the board. And of course, working on flexibilities to manage that at the same time, you don't have to throw nonstop changes in that direction. And there's actually another piece that I think people don't realize, and that is nobody likes being told what to do. Nobody likes having their autonomy diminished, and especially autistic individuals do not like that. The entire day they are told to do things by other people, much of which is uninteresting, much of which has no use. And so again, with any individual that you're interacting with, the more that you can provide autonomy, choices, self-direction, I think that is great. And I think it is especially important for autistic individuals who feel more comfortable when they are able to make choices, when they are able to determine what it is they do and what it is they are able to accomplish.
There's been so much focus on children with autism, and yet more and more adults are thinking about whether they may have autism or be on the spectrum. What's the work like with them? What might they be thinking about with this? They're on this journey of self-discovery like everyone is. Are you seeing more and more adults coming to you with these sorts of questions, or coming to you with requests for help? What's going on with adults? Because it seems, and again, not my field, but so much focus has been on the children. We don't want to neglect or abandon the adults.
What a great question, because the truth is that we are seeing many more adults coming in, understanding that they are autistic themselves. I think that the field of psychological testing has grown tremendously, and it's grown tremendously very, very recently. So that testing, first of all, testing used to very much miss autistic traits in women. There were a lot of miss in terms of autistic traits in adults. And I think the field has just grown so tremendously recently. And then what it does is it actually allows people to recognize that they are autistic, which I think is a wonderful thing, because it explains so much as to what somebody's strengths are and where they've been struggling. I think also the other beautiful thing about it is about autism is that it can also be a community. And finding the other individuals who are autistic and proudly autistic and relate to each other is really important. It's something that I think adults often have more access to than, let's say, a 7 or 8-year-old to find their community. Oftentimes you'll have teenagers who are finding online their community. And I'm hoping that the autistic online community will be growing and proud, hope it in person as well. But the adults are coming in and recognizing that so much of what they've struggled with is not a deficit within them, but has been a failure in their environment to provide them the elements of what they need to be successful. And the fact that they've been so successful in some areas is a mark of pride, and it's a mark of pride that actually feels wonderful to know that it's not just that this is you, but it's you having a commonality with another set of human beings who are quite exceptional. Like I was speaking about community, one who you belong as one of the groups that you may or may not decide to associate with.
So it's about learning how to understand one's differences and embrace one's differences, and hopefully learning to like and love one's differences, the ways that one is different.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't mean to even minimize skill building in the least. Adults who are autistic also deserve skill building support, because there are ongoing pieces of an environment which do provide a disadvantage. And so learning to love who you are, and that's true of kids as well. Hope to, as parents are on board, I do like to discuss what autism is the youngest ages. And just like at the youngest ages, skill building is often a need. And even in adults, skill building is a need. And skill building can go a very long way to improving the quality of the life you have, even in difficult environments.
And this is pure speculation. We're clinicians, right? So maybe I shouldn't go down this route, but I'll tell you, it's what comes to mind. You wonder about the effects of this polarization in society where there are sadly a fair number of people who really are anti-diversity, right? And what is the impact of that if what's valued is sameness as opposed to really embracing and understanding and loving and learning more about diversity? And is that a source of stress in some way? What do you think?
I think the world has started in general to embrace diversity more. And I think that has actually opened the door to more autistic individuals embracing their own diversity. I think there'll always be a contingent of individuals who don't embrace it. And I guess, and again, I'm not a sociologist, but the trend that I seem to be seeing is that there happens to be, at least more than before, perhaps a greater degree of embracing of diversity, which I hope continues to grow.
Certainly true in our region, for sure. It's one of the really attractive aspects of living here. In certain other areas, not so much. But this whole question of, there's a famous physician and geneticist, Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee, who wrote a book, The Gene and Intimate History. And he talked about how various conditions are a genetic mismatch between the individual and the environment. And sometimes the best medical treatment is to change the environment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And people should be in environments where their diversity is celebrated. And you're right. I don't know enough about anthropology or sociology to know exact rates or where. And I also do know that you're right on and right exactly correct, that if you are in an environment of any kind, be it geographic, be it social, be it academic, where your diversity is not being embraced and more than embraced, celebrated. That's one of the things, my practice isn't neurodiversity affirming, it's neurodiversity celebrating. That if you're not celebrating it, and then one of the first things to do is to actually, if possible, again, it's not always possible, but looking for an environment where that is a value and where you are valued for who you are is a really important thing to do.
It brings to mind, we have these genotypes like orchid genes and dandelion genes, and they're named after the flowers for a reason. So an orchid is exquisite, yet an orchid needs the right environment, right? A nurturing environment, the right soil, the right temperature, the right hydration, and so forth. In the right environment, the orchid flourishes and becomes elegant and beautiful. In a harsh environment, the orchid withers. As opposed to a dandelion can grow anywhere, but a dandelion will never be an orchid. And so one of the things we do in working with our patients that have an orchid gene is we really help them understand their environmental sensitivities and the importance of context. And let's say when they're seeking work, finding an environment that's more nurturing, that's more focused on developing them as an individual. Is there something analogous to that in the kind of work that you're doing with individuals with autism, that you help them think through these environmental issues?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's finding and figuring out the right environment that you need to thrive. And for some individuals, it has to be a lot more conscious and a lot more directed. For some, there is that capacity to thrive in various environments to some degree, but to some degree, everybody benefits from a set of circumstances that plays to their strengths and that diminishes the need for skills in their areas of deficit.
That's really well put. That's beautifully stated. Well, you're an author. As a fellow author, I know how hard it is to write a book and have it published and bring it to market. Tell us about your book.
My book, The Crimson Protector. Crimson Protector is a novel for tweens and teens, and it follows the protagonist in his travels to become a superhero. And it teaches teens and tweens how to handle bullying, how to overcome social anxiety, how to build confidence, but not in a workbook sense, but rather through the story, how this character encounters struggles and overcomes them, teaches them organically in the course of the story. So I like it when people learn when they're not even aware that they're learning. And this is one of those stories that reads exactly like a superhero adventure novel, but that also in the course teaches kids. And I've had some wonderful feedback. People have written to me. There was one wonderful email I received about somebody who just transferred to a new school and read the book, and it helped him overcome his social anxiety to meet new people. Another parent reached out and said after reading the book, their kids opened up to them about bullying they had experienced, and the parents had never heard that before. That's what I wrote the book for. And the response that I'm getting back from those who read it is that it's doing that. That's all that an author can hope for. Well, I mean, an author can hope for it to actually sell more than mine is actually selling. So let's just say that could be hoped for. But the other part, what it accomplishes for the people who do read it, it's everything I could have hoped for.
Well, it sounds like you've already touched a lot of people with your book, and really wonderful to get that kind of feedback from people that you've made a difference in their lives. And where can people find the book?
You can find it at the website, thecrimsonprotector.com, or if you just type that in on Amazon, you'll be able to purchase that right on Amazon.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Dr. Kranzler. You're a very busy guy with a rapidly growing practice, which means that you and your colleagues must really be helping lots of people. Any parting words of wisdom or inspiration for parents who have children with autism or adults and they wonder about whether or not they have autism or have learned that they do? What would be some takeaways that could bring them a feeling of hope?
I would say a couple of things. First, I would say is that either you or your child are part of a very exclusive group of individuals, the kind of individuals who make great changes, who thrive in the fields that they choose. And I hope that you will, in addition to all the communities that you are a part of, that you will think about for yourself or for your child, joining a community of other autistic individuals, not to the exclusion of everyone else, but rather in addition to it. I hope that you take it on as a proud part of your identity. And I hope that you remember, most of all, that the struggles that you have are not deficits within you. They are struggles with the current environment as it is set up. So I hope that all of those pieces, individuals who are autistic, I hope parents of autistic individuals who might be thinking, who are not autistic or who might be suspecting that perhaps they are autistic or their parent was autistic, I hope that you'll take this into account, that there is nothing broken in you or your child. You are not broken. In fact, you are gifted with some really amazing things, and you are presented with some very difficult challenges too. And I hope you rise to embrace your strengths, and I hope that you don't dismiss yourself because of your struggles, and that you find the best environment and the best field and the best people who will appreciate you for who you are.
Your passion and your love really come across in what you just said. It really is special. How do people find you? How do they find you and your practice?
My practice can be found at CAPS Community. That's KAPS Community.com. And yes, community is an important part, which is why it's in our web address. So CAPS, KAPS Community.com.
Great. And just to remind our viewers and listeners, Dr. Kranzler's podcast today will be on our website as well as his. And on our site, we have a series of other podcasts on autism, ranging from nutritional aspects to help parents understand some of the nutritional issues, the gut microbiome with Dr. Rob Knight at UCal San Diego, Dr. Ng talking about the bullying receptor antibody test, and Dr. Johnson talking about how to evaluate and treat ADHD in children with autism. So we will proudly publish Dr. Kranzler's podcast alongside these others so that those of you who really want a deeper understanding of these different dimensions of autism can come to one place to find them. Well, once again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it and wish you the best.
Thank you so much.